Hi, my name is Rachel Shutter, and this is my presentation on China's one-child policy. The Chinese one-child policy was first instituted by the Communist Party in China under leader Deng Xiaoping. It was put in place in 1980. This policy was put in place to help alleviate the burden that had been put on China at this time from a food shortage, which actually resulted from a large jump in population. But this was also to help alleviate the social and economic stress on the nation as well. The population jump actually happened after former leader Mao Zedong had led a campaign in order to encourage families to actually have more children, which resulted in obviously a larger population that China just could not withstand. This policy was seen as a means of population control, and how it works is only one child was permitted per family, and if there was more than one child, families would be charged thousands and thousands of dollars. Most families could not afford that. Some even lost their jobs if they didn't follow the child quota. In order to apply for a second child, the process is super tedious and expensive, so most didn't do it. And because most families they wanted boys to carry on the family name. So often, if the first child wasn't a boy, it was a girl, mothers would sometimes abort the pregnancy, abandon the girl infant, or even kill the child, resulting in a large male population in China. In relation to world politics, there are many things that tie into this. First of all, basic human rights are largely violated in the one child policy instated in China. As stated previously, most families want their only child to be male as to carry on the family name. This created the idea of the unwanted sex. Because of this intense importance put on the male being the only child, this creates what is known as gendercide, or the systematic killing of a certain sex solely because of their sex. The systematic killing of Chinese girls simply because of their gender includes late term abortions, abandonment of young female babies in the street, along with this systematic killing of these Chinese girl babies. Not only does this infringe on the rights of Chinese girl babies, the one child policy largely violates the rights of mothers and women in China. There are stories of women being forcibly sterilized after having their first child by family planning officials. Some are also forced into abortions and dangerous contraceptive measures. In violation of the Declaration of Human Rights, the one child policy is a huge offender of this. A document that proclaimed by the General Assembly of the United Nations and was written by a drafting committee that included Eleanor Roosevelt. The document that once again was signed by China states that everyone is entitled to the right of security of person, and for said person to never be subjected to cruel and unusual punishments, which the one child policy clearly violates because of reasons mentioned above. Because China is a permanent member of the Security Council and is part of the P5, little to no action is taken against them for these violations. They are a world power in the United Nations, so they hold a lot of power when it comes to this, and there will most likely be no repercussions for their actions. Another aspect that motivated China that we can look at through world politics that motivated them to implement the one child policy in the 1980s is to look at the population at the time. China had a large population of close to almost a billion people in the 80s and wanted to become industrialized and eventually developed like the United States, obviously. And it's hard to do that when you have no middle class and such a large population. So the solution that the Chinese government came up with was the one child policy. Now, China simply did not have enough resources or the means to support such a large population. So the policy's aim was to create a negative birth rate or negative population growth. And by doing this, there was less people that they had to make the standard of living higher for. And so this was a lot easier to do than with such a large and fastly growing population. This was China's economic relief plan to relieve the economic stress on the country. China's negative population growth rate resulted in less young people in the nation and less women as well. The gender gap of 3.2% between men and women has resulted in more men in the general population. The policy, although not completely eliminated in late 2015, was eased. It now allows families to have at most 2 children. Reasons for this easement include a plan to relieve the slightly declining Chinese economy and to help support it as well as there's more jobs. Also, to help control and close the gap between men and women, now that China has the resources to support the larger population. As you can see on the chart to the right, the literacy rates of men and women, especially women, have drastically increased over the past 30 years or so since it has been implemented. Um, Also, it is proven that when people become more educated, they become more demanding of things like human rights and equality. So it could be safe to say that since the population has become more educated, they can see the wrongdoings in the one child policy and the severe violation of human rights that it entails. So, this could be one of the many reasons that the one child policy has been eased recently. As mentioned earlier, and as you can see from the graphic on the left, the gap between men and women in China has increased drastically in the last 30 years, and even more so in the last 50 years. This proves that China's social norms over the last half a century or so have favored a male dominant population and a male dominant China. Also, as you can see on the graphic on the right, China's fertility rates in 2012, being that they were 1.6 births per woman, were on the low end of the spectrum compared to other world powers who are closer to 2 births per woman. This graphic shows the lasting effects of the one child policy and how a world power can have such a low birth rate after having almost a billion people in their population in the 1980s. Problems will not necessarily be resolved in the nation because of the easement of this one child policy. This is mostly due to the fact that it's been in place for about 3 decades now, and it's taken its hold on the country and the everyday lives of its citizens. Also, this easement of the policy doesn't mean that women have any more reproductive rights whatsoever, and it's still in large violation of the Declaration of Human Rights that is signed by China in the General Assembly of the United Nations. Also, because sometimes social norms and socially acceptable practices, such as the one child policy that has been practiced for 30 years in China, tend to hold more weight than laws or policies. The one child policy has been a norm for so long in China, it might not be a popular thing to have more than one child at first. So, China might not see an economic change that they hope to when easing this policy, and it might not turn out the way that the government had planned.